Welcome. Welcome to this Google EDU on-air session about enabling students to publish dynamic sites using forms. Now, at the crux of it, what this presentation is going to show you is how to take a Google form, connect it to a Google site, and have it publish this dynamic goodness where students can sort of authentically publish with minimal teacher involvement. We'll build in a teacher moderation piece so that they can control how and when a student publishes to the site. But in general, this is really about empowering students to be creators of content. Okay, so we're going to organize the presentation into three discrete sections. We're going to start by connecting a form to an awesome table Google Sheet. So it's a specially formatted Google Sheet that will connect to the gadget that we're going to use. Then we're going to connect the actual gadget to that sheet. And then finally, we're going to build in the moderation piece so that teachers can control how the student work and when the student work goes to the site. And it's also a sort of a live moderation. So if at any point you want to take one of the pieces, one of the student works off the site, you're able to do that as well. So this interesting thing happens when you take sort of like your run-of-the-mill book report and you give it an authentic audience. All of a sudden, that book report becomes a review. It becomes sort of like a sharing of thoughts, of opinions. And then if you take those reviews that are given to this authentic audience and you collect them in a review database, now students have a sense of purpose. They're not only creators of content for an audience, but they're curators of content for an audience. And that is a powerful thing for kids. There's this great quote by Rushton Hurley that I really relate to, that resonates with me. He says, if students are sharing their work with the world, they want it to be good. If they're just sharing it with the teacher, they want it to be good enough. And this is certainly something that I'm noticing with the students in Scarsdale, where I'm a technology coach. The kids really take pride in the fact that they are creating this database of book reviews for one another. My own child, my daughter, isn't a student in my school system, but begs me to sign her into the system so that she can contribute her own reviews. And that speaks to the power of this authentic audience. Now, before we get started, I should really introduce myself. I'm John Calvert. I'm a technology coach for the Scarsdale Public Schools in New York. And I'm lucky enough to be joined by Dr. Gerald Ardito, who's going to be helping me moderate questions. Gerald, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure, John, thanks so much for asking me to be with you this afternoon, or whatever time people are in who are watching this. As John said, I'm Gerald Ardito. I'm a professor in the School of Education at Pace University. My interests are in the use of technologies to allow students to be as responsible as possible for their learning, and so I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for including me.
Thanks for being here, Gerald. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
Okay, so we're going to take a look at what this system eventually becomes. Okay, now this is the actual system that we use in Scarsdale. We call it the book room. I'm going to go there now. And what you see here, this is actually what an awesome table looks like in a Google site. Now this awesome table uses what they call the sidebar format. So as I click on a book here, the sidebar populates with information from a Google Sheet. This is all being fed from a Google Sheet. Now at the top, we've got these categories. And this is a beautiful thing because it turns this gadget into almost like a relational database for our Google Sheet, an interface to take that information that's formerly trapped in your sheet and pull it into a website and make it usable. So what I can do is I could, for instance, sort by author. And as I select authors from the drop-down box, those authors or the books that those authors have written populate in the list, right? And this is an interesting thing because what I can also do is I can make the buttons dependent. So the genre button, for instance, is dependent on the author button. And as I select authors over here, the genre selections change, they update. So I'm going to actually remove my authors now, and you can see when I click on the genre list, I get the full list, not just the 3 that you saw before. You can also bring in checkbox questions and make number sliders, which is also really useful when students are trying to find a book that's just right for them. Okay, so how do you do this? Now, the thing that makes this work is the site itself is powered by a Google form. If I go back to our presentation here, now this presentation, I'm going to link this presentation on the resource doc. There's the resource doc that, there we go, if anybody wants to play along at home. Okay. Now, this site really is powered by a Google form. What we want to do is we want the site to have the least restrictive entry point, so that students from any building in our district, any grade level, can submit a review of a book they just read. It's a really simple thing. So I'm going to click on this link here and open up our demo site. So this form here actually has a few more categories than we'll need for today, but a lot of these categories help populate the more complex example that's also included in the sheet that you can open from that resources document. When a student fills out this form, it does what form responses normally do. It populates a Google spreadsheet. So, with the headers at the top for each of the form questions and all of the form responses underneath. Unfortunately, with Awesome Tables, we need to take those form responses and we have to format them in a way that is specific to the Awesome Table. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there. We have to make move some data around to make the data work for the Awesome Table gadget, and that's what we're going to tackle first. It's actually not that hard, especially if you use a couple of tricks that we're going to talk about today. All right, so looking at here, you can looking at this slide, you can see the difference between a form response sheet and an Awesome Tables sheet. Now, namely, the biggest difference is the second row of the Awesome Tables sheet provides the directions to the gadget. It gives the gadget it tells the gadget whether or not a column should be hidden in the table underneath the buttons, and it also tells the gadget how the buttons work. So should the button be a slider, should the button be a drop-down list, and the name row, the first row in the sheet, becomes the actual name of the buttons. So that's also important, because what might make a good form question, which normally is what a header title would be, might not be a good button name. So there's a couple of things we have to change here. The first question we have to answer is, how do you get the data from your form sheet and move it over into your Awesome Tables sheet in an easy way? And really the truth of the matter is, you want to learn how to write a query, right? I think every teacher should know how to write a query. I think it's one of those fundamental spreadsheet skills that's really valuable. But I also know from working with teachers that as soon as I start talking about queries, eyes glaze over, they look at the clock. It's not for everybody, right? Although once you start playing with queries, I think you change your mind. Nonetheless, fortunately, there is an add-on that was recently developed by Bjorn Rennet called Easy Query that will do the heavy lifting for you, all right? And that's what we're actually going to use right now. So we're going to install Easy Query on our sheet and actually use it to move the data from our form sheet over to an Awesome Tables sheet. All right, so what you have to do is you have to go into your form sheet. Now, you guys are playing along at home. If you want, you could make a copy of this sheet and you could actually do it from the comfort of your account or your chair at home. I'm going to be kind of going through the steps on the screen share. So you need to click on Add-ons and go to Get Add-ons to find Easy Query. So simply type in Easy and do a search there. Easy Query will come up and you can add it. Now I've already added Easy Query, so you see for me it says Manage. You would click Add and then give Easy Query the permissions that it needs. Alright, so once Easy Query is installed in your Google Sheet, you're going to click on Add-ons and go down to Easy Query and Create Sheet. Because really what Easy Query is going to do is it's going to insert a new sheet on the bottom of your spreadsheet for the data that you're moving over. So in this case, I'm going to call my new sheet Awesome Table. And then I'm going to call it Live, because that's what we are right now. So Awesome Table Live is going to be the name of the new sheet. I don't want all of the columns. Specifically, I don't want the username column because I don't want my students' usernames to be published on the book review site, right? So I uncheck that. I also don't want column O and column P at this point in time, so I'll uncheck those as well. And I'll hit Create. As soon as I do that, Easy Query does what it needs to do, and it installs a new sheet on the bottom of my spreadsheet with all of that information pulled in. Now, we're going to actually deconstruct this query a little bit, okay? So if I take a look at back to our presentation, and I click on cell A1, in the formula bar, you will see the query that was put there by the add-on. Now, if you pull that query apart, these are the components to a query. After you get the function name, query, you have the name of the spreadsheet. In this case, form responses 1. That's where all the data is being brought in from the Google form. And then you've got an exclamation point that separates the name of the sheet with the range of cells that we're bringing across. Now, our range of cells is 1, so A1, all the way down to 100,000. That's how the query, Easy Query works. So many more. If we get that many rows, we're doing pretty good with our students and their book reviews. Then after that, you've got your columns. Now, you'll notice that the column B is omitted here because we unchecked it in our add-on. And then all the way at the end, we've got this solitary 1. That's the number of rows that you need for the header, right? And the reason they put that in there is because a query allows you to sort the data. You can sort alphabetically, or you could sort by a number column, or there's different ways that you can move the data around inside of a query. If you tell the query that there's a header, it will keep that first row static while all the other data sorts, which is useful. But we're going to change this a little bit because what we need to do is we need to add those 2 rows above the data, right, to accommodate our Easy Table. So what we're going to do is we're going to omit the header row. We're going to change the 1 to a 2 so that the header row is no longer included in the query. And then because we're excluding that header row, all the way over on the right, we're going to turn the 1 to a 0 because we're taking that query, that header row out. So let's look at what that actually looks like. I'm going to go into my query, and I'm going to change it from being a 1 to a 2, and that's going to take out the header row. And let me zoom in a little bit here. There you go. So now I don't have a header row anymore. Then I'm going to go over here, and just to keep it clean, I'm going to tell my query that there's no longer a header row. So I changed that 1 to a 0. All right. So now I'm ready for my 2 new rows, the 2 rows that are going to be the Awesome Table rows. I'm going to Control or right-click on the 1 next to the first row, and I'm going to insert a row above the data. I'm going to do it again. So now I have 2 rows above the data. Now I'm ready to put in my button names and my category filters. let's look at what that looks like. So I'm going back to the presentation just to show you the different components that you can add to an awesome table. Okay. Now, like we mentioned before, the first row are the names of your buttons. The second row are the instructions to the awesome table gadget to how to display that data or not to display that data. So you'll notice that a category filter, if I go back to my spreadsheet here, and I'm going to go to this guy. Okay, so I've got my authors set up as a category filter. A category filter in the spreadsheet will allow you to pick any of the data that is in the spreadsheet and add it sort of in an additive way, an accumulative way to the awesome table. So that's what a category filter is. Now you'll notice that next to category filter, I've added G in parentheses. That allows me to make my filter dependent. So I can take my author filter, make it category filter G, and that tells Awesome Table that column G is dependent on the author column, right? So if you remember, our genre list changed dynamically based on the authors that we had selected in the author category filter. That's because the genre list, column G, is dependent on the author list. Now, you'll also notice hidden is plastered all over this awesome table sheet. If you put in hidden on that second row, the column itself will not appear in the table. Okay, so if you put in hidden there, the button could still appear, but the information itself will be omitted from the table beneath it.
John, excuse me, I'm going to jump in. There's a couple of questions that that I think would be helpful. So one was, Nick raised a question about whether Google Sites is going to be deprecated soon. So if you could address that. The second question is, I think before you go further, I think there's some unclarity, and Tara asked this question. Can you explain what an awesome table is?
Yes. Okay, both excellent questions, so I'm glad you brought them up. I appreciate it. So I have it on good authority that Google Sites is not being deprecated. So this rumor has been flying around, and I actually spoke to some people, and they it was under good authority that it's not being deprecated, and it's considered a valuable part, especially of the Google Apps for Education product. I don't think it's used that often for business, but as far as Google Apps for Education is concerned, there are no plans to get rid of it. So that's good news. As for Awesome Tables, that's actually the next step. So that was a great question. Awesome Tables is a gadget. In Sites itself, if I go to a Google site, you can add all sorts of gadgets to a Google site. Some people call them widgets. They're like little tiny apps that allow for new functionality in the website. So if you add a Google Doc to your Sites page, that's considered a Google Doc gadget. It's embedding the doc into the Sites page. Or you might add a YouTube video to your Google site, and that would be a YouTube video gadget, which goes inside the site. So Awesome Tables is this little app that you can insert into your Google site to connect to that spreadsheet and show the data on the spreadsheet in a dynamic, with a dynamic interface. So really, once you connect a Google form to that spreadsheet, now you have a way of saying not only is the site dynamic, but the site we can make our students contributors to the site in a safe way, because we'll also be able to moderate it. We're actually going to look at the awesome table in a second. So I'm really glad you brought that up. It was a good segue.
John, and then there are also some questions, the ones I see in front of me from Tammy and from Jennifer and from somebody else I missed at the moment. Concerned about the complexity of what you're talking about. Is this doable by, somebody used the phrase the average teacher, but if you could, I don't know whether you're going to address it later, but certainly I think it's worth addressing.
Sure. Well, I think that, we're actually almost ready. We're almost ready to connect it to the awesome table. So I know it seems a little daunting at the moment, but this simple awesome table is actually very doable to create, especially if you use that easy query add-on. So now that easy query add-on does all the heavy lifting for you. The thing that you have to do is you have to change two numbers in order to insert those two rows above. Once you do it once, you've got it. It really is changing two numbers and then inserting two rows. And then you're ready to format your spreadsheet to work with Awesome Table. So this and the formatting the spreadsheet to work with Awesome Table is actually fairly easy. If you want information to show up in the table, leave it blank. If you want to hide information so that it doesn't show up in the table, put in hidden, the word hidden. And then after that, there are different types of buttons that you can use in the table. So if you want to put in one of those buttons, you have to type one of these commands into that row. Now, all of this is inside of an Awesome Table documentation doc that's also linked on the resources page for this session. So you can take a look at that. It's an incredible document. It probably, it goes into all of the different types of Awesome Tables that you can create. This is just one type of Awesome Table. So it's maybe 30 pages long. But if you want to if you want to learn about how a date filter works, which is really useful because you can say, I only want to look at documents that were created in the last month, let's say. It's a little slider. You can slide it over. You can read the paragraph about date filters, and it's a well done document. So, like for instance, this is a reader age slider. So that's kind of neat because whenever Awesome Table sees a column with numbers, it automatically gives it this slider. You actually don't even have to call it, what do they call it? A number range filter. You don't have to type that in. It'll automatically give you a slider. So if I look at my book room here and I go to reader age, you'll see that reader age is hidden, which means in the book room itself, let me go to the book room demo. In the book room itself, you won't see reader age in the sheet. Let me zoom in a little bit. So reader age won't be a column, but I can slide the slider and it will automatically sort the reviews, right? So it's a hidden column, doesn't show up in the table, but because it's numbered data, ages, I get that neat little slider. If I don't want a slider, I have to type in no filter. No spaces. You type in no filter. So I'm going to go to reader age, and I'm going to type in no filter. This is also in the documentation. And then when I go back to my book room demo and refresh the page, my reader age disappears, right? Because there's no filter for that particular column. All right, now when you're done with your button names, right? So if I look at my book review, my button name for this is authors. My button name for this is genre. And when I go to my spreadsheet, I'll see that this is the button name, authors. This is the button name for genre, right? So it's keeping the title of the column becomes the title of the button. And then the second row gives the Awesome Table the instructions. Is it hidden? is it a button? Okay. You're actually ready now to add this to a Google site. So to actually insert the awesome table, all of the hard work is done. You are ready to make an interactive database now on your Google site. You're ready for it. You've done all of the hard work. I don't know if you're, yeah.
Sorry, before you go, there's a question from Richard about is it possible to print reports from the query? So you're using would you address that, please?
Yeah, sure. That's a really good question. Yes, there's a way of making the data actually downloadable in the awesome table, and there's another way of creating dynamic charts on the awesome table, so that now in terms of printing. I don't think there's a print button that I'm aware of. I might have to get back to you on that to specify for sure, and I'll put it in the documentation. It's a really good question, but I don't think there's like a function to print it. You know what? We'll take a look at it in a section, in a second.
And then John, maybe a related question is, do you have some resources that we can use to study scripting? So if you have any of those, can you add links into your resource document?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would love to.
Great.
Okay, so let's actually insert this into a site. All right, so I'm going to go to slide 31, and just by clicking on the image there, I'm going to go to my book review demo, and I created this blank page that we're going to connect our awesome table to. So in order to add the gadget, I have to edit the page first. So I click the pencil on the top right, and since I'm an editor of the site, I have that option. And then I go to Insert. Now these are all of the gadgets that Google's created, right? These are like the Google gadgets, the official Google gadgets. Awesome Tables is developed by a guy named Romain Vallard, and really amazing developer. He's also done some pretty incredible add-ons. But since he's a third-party developer, you've got to go to More Gadgets. Because Awesome Tables is so aptly named, Google has put it into the featured gadget list. So all I have to do is click Featured, scroll all the way to the bottom of that list, and Awesome Tables is right there. All right, so I'm going to click Awesome Tables and select it, and it brings me to my Awesome Table edit menu. So one thing to be aware of right here is Awesome Tables will follow the permissions of the sheet, right? So if you have a spreadsheet that is public only to your domain, so for instance, if I made it public only to Scarsdale Schools, then people outside of the domain or people that hadn't signed into their Google account wouldn't see the data in the Awesome Table. So it follows the permissions of the sheet. For our book review sheet, I have the sheet being public so that anyone can go to the site and read the reviews. You don't have to be signed in. The first thing you have to do is copy the web address of the sheet and paste it into the Google Sheet URL. All right, so that just has to be the actual spreadsheet list. If you want to check to see if it's the right list, the right address, you can click Open Sheet, and if it's correct, it's going to open up for you. Now, the next cell that you have to complete is the actual sheet name, and this has to be exact. So I'll go into my demo sheet again, and we called it, I believe, Awesome Table Live. So I'll go down, and I'll literally just double-click on that name, and I'll just copy it so that I know that it's exactly the same. And then I'll put it into our sheet name. Okay, so it has to be the exact same name of the sheet that EasyQuery made for you. All right, next I have to give my range. This is the range of cells that that you need awesome tables to read. So it should start with A1. That's the first cell on the top left corner. And then you might want to take a look at your sheet and see how far across it goes. So we actually have to do a couple of things here. I'm going to copy these rows from our sample page so that we know it works. And I'm just going to paste them in to rows 1 and 2. Great. Now, if I go over here, looks like we want to stop at M. So I'm going to go over and go back to my sheet and have this go from A1. We'll actually make it go to N. A1 to N. So that's going to be the active range of columns that Awesome Table is going to read. Always keep the width at 100%. And you can play with how high the gadget is. It's in pixels, right? So if you find that your gadget is too short for your content, you can make the height of the gadget larger. So for our Scarsdale book review site, we make this like 2,000. Just because if a student writes a big long review, we don't have to have a sidebar or a scroll bar on the side. I think 2,000 might be the largest you can make it. All right. So there we have a gadget here. It's been added. If I ever needed to edit the gadget, I would simply click the big gray box inside of this edit window, and there's a little like gear that appears on a menu after you click the box. When I click that gear, it goes back into the, oh, you know what? And I did the rookie thing. It's such an important thing to remember. It's a good teachable moment, in fact. After you edit your Awesome Table, you have to click the Save button. It's very different than pressing OK isn't enough. You got to click that green Save button at the top to keep your data. So everything I just did, I lost. So that's okay, though. All I have to do is copy the sheet again, the sheet address, paste it in, copy the name of the sheet, paste it in, and we're going to column N. So I'll put that in there. Now I'll press Save. I'll make that mistake again, or I probably will, but I know what it is. And then I press OK. All right. So now when I press Save, our gadget should be working. There it is. We've got our authors, our genre, recommended for, all of the different categories that are on top of the sheet. We've just connected a spreadsheet to our Google Doc, or our Google site. And if I change the spreadsheet here, it automatically updates for me. So I think we're actually ready to talk about moderation. Does anybody have any questions about inserting the Awesome Table gadget itself?
John, I don't see any of those questions, although people have them. There's and I've been responding to a couple of questions, but there's still, this may be more appropriate more towards the end, but I think there's some questions about, this seems to be a good deal of work, and so maybe you could address, if it fits in now, great, but certainly at the end, kind of address the practicality for someone. And a related thing is, so that's from those questions are from Tammy. Richard is proposing other possible uses for the kind of dynamic site that you're building from a Google form. So while no one's asked for it, it might be kind of interesting at the end to talk about other possible applications for the kind of process you're outlining.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's a really good point because this is just one use case example, but we've used Awesome Tables for all sorts of things. We've used it for lesson plan repositories. So as teachers develop cool things, they can use a form to submit those things to a site just for our teachers. We've also used it for interesting websites. I can show you some examples of those things as well. So this is what this process does. Allows you to unlock that spreadsheet and bring it into a searchable, sortable interface on a website. It seems like a lot of work, but I just created that. Book review site in 30 minutes, and that's while explaining it to you, right? So if you think about it in that regard, it seems like a lot because of that query thing. That query thing throws people off. They're like, oh, queries, it's complicated. Use easy query, and half of the work is done for you. So I think that if you tried it, you could have this thing licked in 25 minutes. Now let me show you how to moderate this spreadsheet.
Sorry, John, I'm going to jump in one more time.
Absolutely.
Esther asked a question about whether, so she sees for herself some possible uses. Can you have hyperlinks be some of the data? So if you then had hyperlinks in the cell, do they become live links in the site?
They do, absolutely. And in fact, you can also use HTML. So if you're so inclined, you not only could put in a hyperlink, but you could wrap it around like an HTML code for hyperlink, and then it would represent that way in the table. If you knew how to use the hyperlink function inside of a spreadsheet, you could also use that, and then the hyperlinks would represent in the table using the hyperlink function as well. So you could just put in the web address straight from the URL bar of your browser, or you could make it a neat hyperlink that says something like click here to open the resource. So absolutely, you can make it. You can add the links that way. Okay, so moderating this site is actually it's ridiculously easy now. You've done it. You've done all the hard stuff. So now we're going to make it so that you can control what submissions get to the site and which ones don't. All you have to do is insert one column to the right of the furthest most column.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. You have to insert one column on the furthest right of the form responses sheet. So you go back to your database, and I go to my form responses sheet. I scroll all the way over to the right, and you see I've added this moderation column. Now, all you have to do for the submissions that you want to go on the site is I put a 1 next to any submission that I want to go on the site. Now I'll go to my Awesome Table. This is the Awesome Table live page that I created just now. And if you remember, that query we put in before is in A3. It's the start of all of those, all the data that we brought in from the form sheet. And this is my formula bar up here. So that's the query that we have. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that query that we edited before, and I'm going to add a condition. And this shows you some of the power of queries. All I'm going to do is right next to where my columns are, I'm going to type in where O equals 1. So if you remember, column O is our moderation column. So now what the query is doing is it's saying, okay, I'm only going to bring things to the Awesome Table sheet that have been moderated, where the teacher has put in the number 1 in the moderation column, in column O. So now, if I go back to my sheet, and I go back to my form responses, I can, in real time, add reviews simply by typing a 1 there. And if I go back to my demo page, those reviews are now on the site. If I go back to my sheet and I remove a 1, and I update my awesome table, just hit refresh, those reviews have been removed from the site. So you've just built in moderation on this system.
John, you're now pointing towards a question that a couple of folks are asking. So I understand that that it's dynamic. So is there something you do between the steps that you just made and having the new data be live on the site? Or is that an automatic process?
It's automatic. The only thing you have to be careful of is whether or not you've shared the sheet, right? So if the sheet is private, the data is not going to show up on the awesome table. If the sheet is only shared to the domain, then anyone inside of the domain, like Scarsdale Public Schools, will see the data. If it's public, then anyone can. But that's what makes it live. You want to make sure that you copied the web address correctly and that the sheet name for your awesome table information is correct. And that's it. The rest of the work is done for you.
And then a question about data in there. So you answered the question earlier about hyperlinks being data in a cell.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously a Google Doc or any Google Doc would have, when I shared it, I'd have a link to it. So I'm assuming that falls under the same thing. And no one asked this question, but then is there any way to automatically embed a doc? So is there some instruction that you could give that takes the doc and then embeds it on the page, or is that's something outside of the scope of what you're doing?
So if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're wondering is if I click on a link, have the doc appear on the sidebar?
Well, the first is that I'm assuming that if I put the doc as a link, the link would display on the web page.
Yes.
Okay.
That's right.
And then the second question, which no one other than me is asking at the moment, at least from what I can see, is there any way to automatically generate a widget that displays the document on the site?
Not so much. The link to the document, yes, but to embed the document itself in the site actually would probably be scripts that were blocked.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I can do, let's see if I can show you. So yeah, I've got my link, and if I take one of these reviews, for instance, and I'm going to put a link in the review. So let's try this one. Just paste in the link to the spreadsheet, let's say. Okay. Now, if I go back to my book review, let's see if we can find that little link there. Oh, I think I moderated it out. Hold on. Go over. Yep, you got to moderate it back. And now, if I hit refresh, I should see that link. Then I should be able to click on it. Oh, it's not. Look at that. It looks like I have to make it a hyperlink. So it's an additional step, my friends. That means that I've got to go into the sheet and actually make it a hyperlink. So I've got to use the hyperlink function and then put it in order for it to work. but it does. So for instance, if I, one of the sites that I put together, it's called the Chrome Toolbox, and that uses links. So this is also done with an awesome table. If I go to find a review, it's just a different way of formatting the awesome table. So this is a site that's developed to help connect people with extensions and add-ons to help diverse learners. So sort of an assistive technology site. And it's created with Awesome Table. All of this is considered a card interface, so it's one of the choices you can format. And if I click on one of these, it actually opens a link, right? So that's what we're talking about in terms of it being a link. So links will work inside of an Awesome Table.
John, Sabrina asks, is it possible, so in Google Sheets you can embed images, can you also embed video, so can the kids upload videos in their forms?
Yeah, so that's another excellent question. I think what you would need to do, images, absolutely. So if you look at the Quaker Ridge site, we've actually embedded images inside the reviews. So you can copy a web link of an image and just paste the web link in, and then it will render. Now videos, I haven't tried embedding a video in this way. My guess is that it would be stripped out. The script would be stripped out because it's like an embed inside an embed, and that it wouldn't like that. So you probably would have to just put in the link, and then you could follow that link to the website, to YouTube or whatever. But I don't know if you could embed inside of an Awesome Table. I think it would probably. I don't think it would work. But hey, if you try it, let me know. Give that a try. I don't think it'll work though. In fact, I don't know if you want to see, but this more complicated version actually uses HTML to build this sidebar. Right? That's how you've got these images, like the rating stars and the picture itself. So I know some people are concerned about this being a lot of work. If you do something like this, it actually can be a lot of work. It's sort of upfront work, and then then you don't have to touch it again. Doing the site that the Awesome Table Simple site that we were looking at before, isn't too complicated. This is just putting in a table of information that sorts. Now, to doing the complex site, that's where you have to start building HTML dynamically. And I also included that in the sheet. You could look at it if you're up for the challenge. So in the sheet, it's a hidden sheet on the bottom, so I'm actually going to show it. It's a hidden sheet. It's called HTML. And really what I'll do is I will compose my sheet in sites. So I'll just build a sites page like I normally would. And then I'll go into the HTML of that sites page, and I'll copy all the HTML. And I'll find where the variables are in the HTML and paste the before and after the variables into the HTML page, just like this. So this shows me the heading of my HTML, and then the bad beginning is the title variable, right? So that's the title section of the form. And then I've got the HTML that's supposed to go after the title. And then I've got my author variable, right? So this is how the HTML fills out, and I separate the variables in unique rows, and then on the complex page I build the HTML dynamically on the Awesome Table sheet. So all the way over on column 0. Now this is a deep dive. This is not for this is the complex stuff, right? And we've really run out of time, but if I click on one of the cells if I click on O1 or O3 rather, in the complex Awesome Table sheet, you'll see what I'm doing is I'm actually building the HTML dynamically using that HTML page, right? So it's saying, all right, pull everything in from H3 because that's the So it'll actually build the HTML based on the forms, and this becomes the sidebar content. So this is definitely complex stuff, and if you're interested in doing complex awesome tables, you should try to reach out to me on Google Plus or on Twitter. I'd be more than happy to help you with that. Go to my blog, edtechtofu.com, where I kind of explain this. We certainly won't have time for it today, and it's not for everyone doing this complex version. But it does come out pretty neat, so if you're interested in giving it a whirl, I encourage you to try. Thank you, everybody. I know I might not have gotten to everyone's questions. I'm going to try to fill them out on the resources page after the fact. Thank you so much for joining Gerald and I today for this Google EDU on Air conference. I appreciate it.